This lesson is the first lesson in a unit that integrates computer science and English language arts in 6th grade. This unit would be taught while my students are doing a novel study on The Giver by Lois Lowry. Some of these lessons in this unit would be taught during ELA, and some of them will be taught during our separate computer science class. Since it's summer break and I don't have students right now, I'm going to record this lesson as if I were recording it for virtual students or any students that may be absent during the lesson, or possibly even any students that may want to review over this lesson. The overall unit, the students will be creating a small group project where they'll have a presentation of a story that they programmed. Many parts of this exact lesson would actually be discussed with partners and then whole group in the classroom. Okay, and I am using Pear Deck for this lesson. Okay, the standards this meets for English language arts is RL 6.5. Analyze how a particular sentence, chapter, scene, or stanza fits into the overall structure of a text and contributes to the development of the theme, setting, or plot. The computer science standard for this lesson is 2AP13, decompose problems and subproblems into parts to facilitate the design, implementation, and review of programs. Our student objectives are, by the end of this lesson, students will be able to identify how part of a story fits into developing the setting, a theme, or the plot of the story. Decompose a paragraph to identify parts that could be removed to create an abstract template that can be reused to create multiple stories with the same format, so a Mad Lib type story. And understand the concept of abstraction. So, what did you have for waffles today? On your screen, you're going to see that you have a spot that you can type an answer. Go ahead and type your answer to that question. I'll give you a few moments. Okay, if you don't have an answer for that question, how about this one? What did you have for toast yesterday? Okay, still don't have an answer? Well, let's look at these two. See what I did there? I identified my personal experience in a very specific manner. And that made it very hard for all of you to relate to. So let's look at these two questions. What could I have said instead that more people would have been able to understand and relate to? Okay, go ahead and think about that. If you think of an answer, go ahead and type it in. Okay, so if nobody has an answer so far, let's think about this. Is there a certain time that people would usually have waffles or toast? What meal do we call that? That waffles and toast are usually associated with. What meal is that? Yeah, so usually we would have waffles or toast with breakfast. So in a way, the word breakfast is like a variable that we use to hold a space for whatever specific thing it is we ate this morning. By taking out that specific word like waffles or toast and replacing it with breakfast, we are using abstraction to make something work for multiple people. Most people can relate to, what did you have for breakfast today? But only people who specifically ate waffles this morning would be able to relate to, what did you have for waffles today? Okay, so what are some other places you might naturally use abstraction? Think about that, using breakfast instead of saying what you specifically ate. What are some other places that we use very generalized words like breakfast instead of asking a specific word or saying a specific word? Okay, think about that. Okay, so if you can't think of anything, what about when you meet new people for the first time or you're getting to know someone better? What are some questions you might ask them? You know, if you have a new friend or we get a new student, you're not just going to go up to them and say, well, what's your favorite red? Not everybody likes the color red, right? So instead we say, what is your favorite color? And then they get to use that word color as a variable. They then get to input their favorite color out of all of them instead of having to specifically choose a red. Okay. So one thing that we've done several times in class, and you've probably done in other grades and other classes, that uses abstraction is Mad Libs. So on this slide, I have a Mad Lib. This was a letter a child sent home from camp to tell their family member about their time at camp. Using abstraction, those specifics that child put into their letter were turned into variable blanks. So now it's a template that can be used to tell many different stories about what happened at camp. So now I want you to use that answer box you have on the right side of your screen to type out this letter, putting things into those blanks. So our letter says, Dear blank, I am having a or an blank time at camp. The counselor is blank and the food is blank. I met blank and we became blank friends. Unfortunately, blank is blank and I blank my blank, so we couldn't go blank like everybody else. I need more blank and a blank sharpener, so please blank blank more when you blank back. Your blank blank. Now when you retype yours, you may not have noticed, this is bothering me a little bit. Counselor's misspelled on that. I fixed it, but for some reason it's still showing up wrong. So maybe I didn't refresh it before I started this. Just know the counselor shouldn't have an O in it. Or sorry, it shouldn't have the U in it. Okay, so one example you could have said is dear. We know that needs to be, that first blank needs to be a person. So, dear Dad, I am having an awful time at camp. The counselor is Bob, and the food is disgusting. I met Jordan, and we became best friends. Unfortunately, Jordan is lazy, and I broke my toe, so we couldn't go hiking like everybody else. I need more sunscreen and a pencil sharpener. So please send many more when you write back. Your daughter, Jane. Okay, so one thing I want to talk about real quick here is usually when you have a Mad Lib, those blanks have labels, right? So under this blank by dear, it would say person or relative or something like that to give you a hint about, what should go on that line. This one didn't, so you could literally put any word on there. We could have said, dear house. So one thing to think about is, was it easier to fill out with no labels on those blanks? Or do you think that made it a little harder, not having a specific of what should be in that blank? Also think about, did the story make sense without those labels? So that's something to think about as you're going forward with things in this unit. How do you want to do that? Do you want to label your blanks? Or maybe you want to do it like we do it in class, where I just give you a list of, number 1, I want an adjective, number 2, a noun, number 3, a pronoun, and so on for each one of the blanks. And then we put them into the story. Maybe you don't even want your reader or the people filling out the Mad Lib you'll create to even know what the basic story template is. Maybe you only want them to know what kind of words you want to put in it. Sometimes that can make it a little more silly. Or sometimes here, this one could be a little sillier because you could make it actually something that could actually happen. That'll be something you'll want to think about going forward. All right, so as we move on, I want you to think about how abstraction is used to make a solution fit many different problems. This makes it easier for one solution to be reused many times, doing less work in the future. So if we think about this story, We could redo this Mad Lib many, many, many times and it come out to a different story every single time. So being able to break a problem down, or in this case, a paragraph down, into smaller parts is an essential skill when doing this. If you can find what several problems have in common, you can use the same solution many times. So think about our scientific method. So we observe something, then we have a question about it. So we make a hypothesis, and then we run an experiment to test that hypothesis. Once we've done the experiment, we've collected all the data, then we analyze it, have an analysis of that data to see what our conclusion is. And then we check to see, well, does our conclusion match our hypothesis? Now, you may be used to seeing the scientific method in a straight line, but now we've realized that this is a constantly going on process. So now they show it in a circle, or they'll have an arrow going back to the top. Just a new way of looking at the same exact process. Okay? Or our engineering design process. So you start with ask. You define the problem. What is the problem? Who has it? And why? Excuse me. Then you're going to imagine. You're going to research and brainstorm and try to come up with a way to solve or answer that problem that you had in the first step. So then after that, you're going to pick one idea. You're going to sketch it or analyze that idea and see if that would work to fix the problem. Then you're going to go and make a prototype. You're going to make one example of that sketch or analysis that you came up with in the plan stage. So then after that, you're going to test that prototype. You're going to see, does it work? And you're going to collect data. Then, if it did work, you're going to share it. You're going to manufacture it. You're going to present it or publish it. If it didn't work, then you start again. You define the problem. Well, why didn't it work? So now you have a new question. And then you research or brainstorm ideas to fix the problem you have now. And then you just keep going. Then you have math. The steps to solving a math problem. First step is understand the problem. You're going to read the problem. You're going to look for keywords and phrases. Maybe draw a picture, make a table, or look for a formula. And identify what you're looking for. What are you trying to answer? Then you're going to create a plan. You're going to write down what you know, either in symbols or in words. Then you're going to find the answer. You're going to perform all calculations, state your answer in a full sentence, and then you're going to check your answer. Did you answer that question that was asked? These are all simplified steps of very complex problems or processes that were broken down into their most simple steps that would fit any, like with the scientific method. This fits any experiment you're ever going to do in science. You're always going to do it in these steps. Anytime you're going to design something for engineering, you are going to follow these steps. It works for every single engineering problem. Same thing with the math problems. You can solve any math problem by following these steps. So somebody sat down and said, well, what do we do every time we do an experiment? Well, we see something, we ask a question, we make a guess on what we think the answer is, then we run experiments, we analyze data, and we come up with a conclusion. So this is where they've abstracted the overall experiment, every single experiment science does, and they came up with the absolute basic steps that have to be taken for it to be considered a scientific experiment. Okay, so now I'm going to show you two stories that are similar. I want you to see if you can figure out where the stories can be abstracted. So what in the two stories are not exactly the same, but are very similar that you could replace that with a blank in both stories? Okay? So let's see those stories. Okay, so we have our first story over here. This one. It was almost December, and Jonas was beginning to be frightened. No, wrong word, Jonas thought. Frightened meant that deep, sickening feeling of something terrible about to happen. Frightened was the way he had felt a year ago when an unidentified aircraft had overflown the community twice. He had seen it both times. Squinting towards the sky, he had seen the sleek jet, almost a blur at its high speed, go past, and a second later heard the blast of sound that followed. Then one more time, a moment later, from the opposite direction, the same plane. Okay, now our second story. It was almost June, and Jonas was beginning to be exhilarated. No, wrong word, Jonas exclaimed. Exhilarated meant that deep, elated feeling of something exciting about to happen. Exhilarated was the way he had felt a decade ago when an official automobile had driven by the school thrice. He had heard it many times. Straining towards the window, he heard the thundering truck, almost a roar at its loud volume, go past, and a minute later smelled the blast of exhaust that followed. Then two more times, a week later, from the northeast direction, the same vehicle. Okay, so I've provided you with, on Pear Deck, a drawing slide for this. What I want you to do is use your drawing tools. You can use the highlighter or the line. I want you to go through and highlight where the words that are different in the two stories. So if we look at that first line, up to the comma, it was almost December in our first story. And in our second story, it was almost June. So we could take our highlighter, and you can use any color you want, I don't care. And we would highlight December because that's different in the two stories. Okay, so I want you to go ahead and do that. Now, once you have identified all the parts, all the words that are different throughout the story, I want you to use your text tool on that drawing page to write a third story using different words that would fit in those places that are different. So instead of saying it was almost December or it was almost June, you could say another month or maybe a season, things like that. And you're going to write your own version of this story. Now, you probably recognize this paragraph. It is a very first paragraph of The Giver, or first couple paragraphs, actually, of The Giver. So you go ahead and do that. And I'll give you a moment. Okay, and these, I will post the stories each of you come up with on the Google Classroom, so that way anybody that wasn't here and you're watching this video, you can look at and compare your story, compare and contrast it to the stories that your classmates came up with, so you can see different versions of it. Okay, so now we're going to continue on to the next slide. So does this paragraph in The Giver contribute to the overall plot, theme, or setting of the story? So first of all, let's remember, what is a story's plot? And remember, that's just this happens first, then this, then this, then this. It's that exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution. 5 points of the story. The setting is the place and time it takes place, and a theme is a overall lesson in part of it. So how does this paragraph, or does it, contribute to any of them? Or maybe more than one? So go ahead and think about that and put your answer on your slide. Again, you have a text slide, so type in your answer. And then let's go to the next slide. So how did it contribute to either the plot, setting, or theme, or more than one of them? So what did it tell us about that plot, or the setting, or the theme? What did we learn about Jonas's community in this paragraph? Did we learn anything about Jonas? Okay, so go ahead and type in your answer in your slide. And now, so did changing the word, maybe this will help you with the last part. Did changing the words change the setting, the plot, or the theme of the story? So if we think about it, what was that overall mood of that first paragraph, the actual paragraph from the book? So Jonas was beginning to be frightened. So he was explaining something that had really scared him. But then in this second story, it was something he was really, really excited about. So think about what that change meant to his community. He was frightened because a jet had flown overhead. So what does that tell you about his community? All right, so go ahead and think about that. And we're going to move on to the next slide. So your homework for the next class is to choose a paragraph from The Giver by Lois Lowry, our book that we're reading in class right now. It should be a paragraph from one of the chapters we've already read. I want you to write some short notes on there on how your chosen paragraph contributes to the plot, theme, or setting of the story. Just like with that first paragraph, it could be more than one. It could, contribute to all three. Maybe you picked a very important paragraph to the story. Okay, so that's what you need to have for our next class. One paragraph. Remember, it says short notes. That means you don't have to have complete sentences. You're having ideas that on how it contributes to that setting, theme, or plot, or more than one of those. Okay, that's all you got to have for next class. Each person should have their own paragraph and their own notes. You will be getting into groups in the next class, but you don't know who is in your group. I want each person to have their own paragraph to contribute to the group, and then the group will be able to decide together which paragraph you want to use for the rest of the project. But I want your group to have several choices. All right, so the last thing you have to do for your exit slip for this lesson is you are going to type out your answers. Oh, I gave you a drawing slide. So you are going to first, in the first box, you are going to use the type tool, the text tool, to define abstraction in your words. So you know what I said it was. If you need to, you can go back in the video and review that. But I want you to put it in your words. How would you explain what abstraction is to somebody in your family or another friend that maybe didn't quite get it? And then in the middle box, I want you to give an example of a way you could use abstraction in your life. So what's something that you do almost the same every day? Or multiple things that you do in almost the same way? And how could you use abstraction to make that easier? And then create some kind of a drawing that could represent abstraction. As always in this class, your drawing is not graded based on how perfectly artistic you are. Remember, I use stick figures. So I am not judging your drawing ability. I am judging does that drawing represent what abstraction is? And it does not have to be perfect. Okay, so once you finish that, you are done with this lesson.